The black cleaner was ignored, reprimanded, and even called a freeloader while trying to soothe the millionaire's autistic son. But when the boy had a meltdown and no one else could help him, it was she who did the impossible. With just an old lullaby and an open heart, what happened next would forever change that entire family. Subscribe to the channel for heartwarming stories every day. There was a silent ache in that mansion. An ache that wasn't seen in the crystal chandeliers, nor in the Italian furniture, nor in the gardens trimmed with surgical precision. It was an ache that echoed through the wide hallways, down the cold marble stairs, behind the perpetually closed doors of the second floor. An ache that had a name, Arthur, 6 years old, deep brown eyes, tousled hair, and a silence so thick it seemed to occupy more space than any scream. He was autistic, and no one in that house knew how to reach him. Therapists came and left defeated. Nannies quit before the week was out. Tutors gave up in tears. The boy would scream. He'd bang his head against the wall. He'd lock himself in his room for hours. And when he finally slept, it was always alone, curled up like a wounded bird. Julia, his mother, cried secretly in the bathroom. Eduardo, his father, pretended to be too busy with meetings. And the housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, just repeated to everyone with a venomous tone, "That boy is hopeless. It's in the family. Better to just leave him be." It was on a rainy Saturday that Rosaline arrived. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel for touching stories every day. She wasn't hired through a recommendation. She had no fancy resume. She was hired in a rush because the previous cleaner had quit via text and never showed up again. Rosaline came from the outskirts of a town you've probably never heard of, taking a bus and 2 connecting rides, arriving late. She arrived wet but with her dignity intact, worn-out shoes but clean, a tired face but serene. Mrs. Gable greeted her with the look of someone appraising livestock. "You'll handle general cleaning. Start with the kitchen, move to the guest rooms, and finish in the sunroom. Don't touch anything of the boys, and please don't try to talk to him. He doesn't respond, and the mistress doesn't like any fuss." Rosalind just nodded. She didn't say a word. She took the apron hanging behind the door, put it on calmly, and started to work. The scent of coconut soap soon spread through the house. She cleaned with attention, even with care, as if every corner deserved respect, as if the floor was also worthy of attention. Towards the end of the morning, she heard a noise from upstairs, a dull thud, then muffled crying, then screams. Screams that hurt just to hear. It was Arthur. Mrs. Gable rushed upstairs, followed by Julia. Rosaline stood in the hall, damp cloth in hand, her heart aching. She knew that kind of crying. It wasn't a tantrum, it was desperation. It was loneliness translated into sound. Minutes later, Julia came down, her eyes red. Eduardo entered through the front door, coming from a meeting. He looked at his wife and asked, irritated, "Again?" She didn't answer. She just went back upstairs, defeated. And Rosaline kept cleaning, but now with a heavy heart, with a strange urge to go up those stairs, to open that door, to do something no one else seemed able to do, something she herself didn't yet know what it was. Rosaline woke up every day at 4:30 in the morning, before the sun rose, before the birds sang, before any light touched the windows of the small house where she lived with her elderly mother and 2 nephews. She got up in silence, made coffee, prepared her lunchbox, left lunch ready for her mother to heat up, and left. Still dark, alone, heading to the bus stop 6 blocks away. She didn't complain. She didn't sigh. It had been like this for as long as she could remember. She was 43, but her eyes seemed to carry decades more, not of sadness, of experience, of stories kept in silence, of tears wiped away without witnesses. She had been married. She had lost a baby son. She had worked at markets, hospitals, homes, daycare centers. She had washed, ironed, cooked, cared, always with busy hands, always with her heart on alert, but never with bitterness. There was something about her that others couldn't understand, a kind of quiet light, a peace that didn't come from fanatic religion nor from blind conformity. It came from something deeper, from a silent choice to keep being human, even when the world insisted on treating her as invisible. She sang softly as she cleaned, old lullabies, songs her grandmother sang when she was a child and was afraid of the dark. Songs that spoke of the moon, the river, the wind, of simple things that made the heart rest. In the Montero mansion, she spent the whole week cleaning, organizing, picking up what no one saw. Arthur's scattered toys, the shoes left around the house, the half-empty juice glasses, the towels thrown on the floor. Everything she touched with care, as if saying without words, "You matter." On the third day, while mopping the second-floor hallway, she heard the crying again. That same cry, desperate, suffocated, coming from behind the white door at the end. Mrs. Gable passed her in a hurry, going upstairs with a tray of medication. "Another episode," she muttered without looking at Rosaline. "You better go downstairs. You don't want to get involved." But Rosaline didn't go down. She stood there, in the hallway, listening, feeling, as if something inside her recognized that cry, as if that boy was asking for something no one else heard. When Mrs. Gable left the room, locking the door behind her with a tired expression, Rosaline asked softly, "Is he okay?" The housekeeper stopped. She looked at her with a mixture of surprise and irritation. "He's never okay. He's been like this since he was born. You better not get involved, dear. It's none of your business." And she went downstairs. Rosaline was left alone in the hallway. The crying had stopped, but she knew the boy was still awake, alone, locked in, afraid of something no one saw. She put the cloth back in the bucket, went downstairs slowly, returned to the kitchen, and while washing the dishes she sang softly, "Sleep, my little one, the wind will soon pass. The night is just a whisper, and the sun will wake you." She didn't know why, but she sang, as if someone, somewhere in that huge cold house needed to hear, "Not all that glitters is gold, and not all that smiles is true." The Montero mansion was living proof of that. From the outside it was perfect, impeccable gardens, automatic gate, 24-hour security, imported cars in the garage. Inside, it was a minefield of unspoken resentments, of sideways glances, of words left unsaid that weighed heavier than any shout. Eduardo Montero owned a chain of luxury car dealerships. A man in an impeccable suit, always, a Swiss watch, the posture of command. But in his eyes there was something faded, as if he'd given up on something important a long time ago. He avoided his son. He avoided his wife. He avoided any conversation that required more than automatic politeness. Julia, his wife, was the opposite. She lived glued to her phone, scheduling appointments, researching treatments, reading articles about autism, trying everything. But deep down she was exhausted, exhausted from trying, exhausted from failing, exhausted from feeling that no matter how much she did, it would never be enough. And Mrs. Celia, Mrs. Celia, she was the true queen of that house. The housekeeper for 12 years. She knew every secret, every weakness, every Achilles heel, and she wielded it with mastery. She controlled the schedules, she controlled the staff, she even controlled what Julia ate for breakfast. And she did not like Rosaline one bit. From day one, she watched with hawk eyes. She noted every movement, every pause, every glance Rosaline cast in the direction of the second floor. "That one's got her eye on something," she muttered to the cook, Valdirine, as they had coffee in the pantry. "A cleaner doesn't stare upstairs like that. Either she's too curious or she's plotting." Valdirine shrugged. "She seems like a good person, Celia. Works quietly, doesn't complain, doesn't interfere." "Yeah," Donna Celia countered with a wry smile. "Not yet." The following Saturday, it happened. Rosalind was finishing cleaning the entryway when she heard Arthur's scream again. This time, louder, more desperate, as if something had exploded inside him. Julia ran upstairs. Eduardo was out of town. Mrs. Celia followed, but with feigned haste, as if she already knew nothing would help. And Rosalind, she stayed below, her heart pounding, her hands trembling. Until she couldn't stand it anymore, she went up, slowly, step by step, as if each stair was a decision. When she reached the hallway, she saw the door ajar. Julia came out crying, defeated. She didn't see Rosalind. She went straight to her room, locking herself inside. Mrs. Celia passed Rosalind with an icy look. "Don't get involved." But Rosalind didn't hear, or pretended not to hear. She pushed the door open slowly and entered. The room was dark, curtains drawn, toys scattered. And in the corner, huddled against the wall, was Arthur, sweaty, breathing fast, wide-eyed, lost. Rosalind said nothing, asked no questions. She simply sat on the floor and began to sing, softly, slowly, like someone lulling a baby. "Sleep, my little one. The wind will soon pass." The boy stopped trembling, turned his head, looked at her, and for the first time in months, he didn't scream. The silence Rosalind brought into that room was an invisible miracle. Arthur, who had spent the whole morning in a meltdown, who had banged his head against the wall until he hurt himself, who had screamed until his voice was gone. Arthur stopped. He looked at this unfamiliar woman, and little by little he crawled towards her. He rested his head on her knee and closed his eyes. Rosalind continued singing. Her hand rested gently on the boy's hair. He didn't pull away. On the contrary, he clung to her like someone holding onto a plank in the middle of a shipwreck. When Julia returned to the room half an hour later, she found her son asleep in the cleaner's arms. She stopped at the door, her mouth agape, her eyes brimming. She didn't know whether to thank her or cry. She did both. How did you do it?" she asked, her voice trembling. Rosalind looked up. She smiled faintly. "I just sang, Mrs. Julia. A lullaby my grandmother taught me. I think he just needed someone to be quiet with him. That's all." Julia covered her face with her hands and burst into tears. For the first time in months, her son was at peace. But what should have been the start of something good soon turned into poison. When Eduardo returned from his trip, Julia told him everything, with emotion, with hope. She thought her husband would be happy, that they would finally have a light at the end of the tunnel. But Eduardo didn't smile. He frowned and asked, "The cleaner, you let the cleaner into Arthur's room?" Julia blinked, confused. She helped Eduardo. She managed to calm him down. For the first time in... "Julia," he interrupted, his voice hard, "don't you find it strange? A woman we barely know, alone with our son. But she just... Julia!" He slammed his hand on the table. "We don't know this woman. We don't know where she came from. And you left her alone with Arthur. Do you realize the risk?" Julia fell silent. Not because she agreed, but because she recognized that tone. The tone Eduardo used when he had already decided something. And nothing she said would make a difference. It was Mrs. Celia who gave the final push. The next day, while Eduardo was having breakfast, she approached with false discretion. "Mr. Eduardo, I don't want to meddle where I'm not called, but that new cleaner has been very close to the boy. Just yesterday she was alone with him in his room, for almost an hour. I thought it was strange." Eduardo looked up. "Strange how?" Mrs. Celia shrugged with a calculated expression. "I don't know, sir. I just think... Well, you never know people's intentions, do you? Especially those who come from outside." That was enough. That afternoon, Eduardo called Rosalind into the living room. She entered with her apron still stained with soap, not understanding what was happening. "Rosalind," he began, his voice cold, "we appreciate your services, but we're going to have to let you go. Change of plans. We're looking for someone with more experience." She blinked. She said nothing for a moment. She just looked at him, at this man in an expensive suit with fear in his eyes, trying to hide his guilt behind a ready excuse. "Did I do something wrong, sir?" she asked calmly. "No, just a family decision." Rosaline nodded. She took off her apron, folded it carefully, and placed it on the chair. She didn't ask for explanations. She didn't beg. She just left. But before crossing the threshold, she turned. "I hope the boy will be all right," she said. And she was gone. The next day, Arthur woke up looking for her. He called out, he screamed, he cried, and no one could calm him. Not Julia, not the new nanny, not the medication. He had a breakdown. Arthur wouldn't eat, he wouldn't sleep, he wouldn't talk. He spent 3 days locked in his room, refusing any contact. Julia tried everything. She sang the same songs Rosaline sang. She sat on the floor like she did. She held her son's hand. But he pulled away, turned his face, screamed. It was as if something had been ripped from him, and he didn't understand why. Eduardo watched from a distance, his face tense. He wouldn't admit it out loud, but he knew. He knew he had made a mistake, a big mistake, driven by fear, by pride, by social pressure. Because deep down, what hurt the most wasn't having sent Rosaline away. It was admitting that she, a simple woman, without a degree, without a notable last name, had achieved something he never could, reaching his own son. Julia, for her part, couldn't take it anymore. On the 4th night, when Arthur woke up screaming for the 10th time, she went downstairs to the living room and confronted her husband. "You need to bring her back," she said, her eyes red. "Julia, Eduardo, I'm not asking. I'm telling you, our son is suffering, and you know exactly why." He looked away. "It's not that simple." "It is," Julia advanced, furious. "You sent away the only person who could help our son because you were afraid of what others would think, afraid that a cleaner would be better than all the expensive therapists we hired." Eduardo remained silent. Julia took a deep breath, controlling her tears. "I'm going to call her, with or without you. I'm bringing her back, and if you don't accept, then you'll have to choose between your pride and your son." She left the room before he could reply. That night, Julia got Rosaline's number through the employment agency. She called. The phone rang 4 times before someone answered. It was an older woman's voice, Rosaline's mother. "Hello? Hi. Sorry to call this late. I need to speak with Rosaline. It's urgent." There was a pause. "She's not here, dear. Went out to work early this morning. Took an extra shift at a bakery. Said she needed to, couldn't just stand around." Julia felt her chest tighten. Could you ask her to call me, please? It's about Arthur, the boy she used to take care of." The voice on the other end softened. She spoke about him, said he was a special boy, had a good heart. "He's suffering without her," Julia admitted, her voice choked. "And I need her back. I'll pass on the message, my dear. But I don't know if she'll want to come back. She left there very hurt, not over the money, but because she liked the boy, and she knows he liked her too." Julia hung up the phone and sat on the kitchen floor, alone, crying silently. While upstairs, Arthur screamed once more, and Eduardo, locked in his study, finally admitted to himself he had been wrong. Rosaline received the message the next morning. She was at the bakery in a white apron, kneading warm bread, when her mother called. She told her about Julia's call, about the desperation in her voice, about the request. Rosaline listened in silence, hung up, and kept working, but her heart felt heavy. She wasn't angry. She never was. But she was tired. Tired of being treated like she was disposable, of being called only when they needed her, of being seen as a temporary fix, not a person. Still, Arthur's face wouldn't leave her mind. In the afternoon, when she returned home, she found a car parked in front, an expensive car, and in it, Julia. Rosaline stopped on the sidewalk. Julia got out of the car, her eyes swollen. "Rosaline," she began, her voice trembling. "I know we have no right to ask for anything, I know, but my son needs you. He's not eating, not sleeping. He cries for you every day." Rosaline didn't answer. Julia took a step forward. "I know my husband was wrong. I know he sent you away out of pride, out of fear, and I ask for your forgiveness for that. But please, come back. Not for me, for Arthur." Rosaline crossed her arms. "Mrs. Julia, I'm just a cleaner. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a doctor. I just sang a song. I just sat on the floor with him, and they sent me away for that. How do you think I felt?" Julia lowered her head. "I know, and I'm truly sorry. Truly." There was a long silence. Then Rosalind sighed. "I won't come back to work as a cleaner. It's not about money, it's about respect. But if you'll let me, I can visit the boy from time to time, just to see if he's okay." Julia looked up, surprised. You would do that?" "For him, yes." The next day, Rosaline returned to the mansion, but not in her apron, in her own clothes, simple but dignified. Julia received her with gratitude, Eduardo with shame, and Arthur ran to her as soon as he saw her, clung to her legs, and for the first time in days he smiled. Rosaline knelt, hugged the boy, and sang, "Sleep, my little one, the wind will soon pass by." He rested his head on her shoulder and closed his eyes. And in that moment, everyone in the room understood something that needed no words. She wasn't just a cleaner. She was a miracle. What happened in the following days was a silent transformation. Rosaline began visiting Arthur 3 times a week. No formal commitment, no fixed salary, just because she wanted to. Because she saw something in him that no one else did. A child who needed to be understood, not fixed. She didn't force him to do anything, didn't impose rules, didn't try to correct behaviors. She was simply present, sang, told stories, played with him in silence. And slowly, Arthur began to open up. He started eating better, sleeping without crises, making eye contact, smiling more, trusting. And Julia, watching all of this, felt something she hadn't felt in years, hope. Eduardo, for his part, watched from a distance, with shame, with repressed admiration. Until, one afternoon, he approached Rosaline while she was helping Arthur with a puzzle. Can I talk to you?" he asked, hesitantly. Rosaline looked up, nodded. They went to the garden, stood facing each other. Eduardo took a deep breath. "I owe you an apology," he said with difficulty. "I sent you away out of fear. Fear of admitting I didn't know how to care for my own son. Fear of what people would say. Fear of not being enough." Rosaline looked at him calmly. "And now I know I made a mistake, and I wanted to ask for your forgiveness. Truly." She was silent for a moment. Then she said serenely, "Mr. Eduardo, you don't need my forgiveness. What you need is to look at your son. Truly look at him. Without fear, without shame. He's a beautiful child. He just needs to be seen and loved, just the way he is." Eduardo felt his eyes sting. For the first time in years he cried. And there, in that garden, he knelt, not to Rosaline, but to himself, to the weight he carried, to the pride that prevented him from being a father. Rosaline placed a hand on his shoulder. "Get up, Mr. Eduardo. The ground is no place for anyone who can stand." He stood up, and for the first time, he looked at her as who she truly was. A wise woman, a strong woman, a woman who, without ever studying pedagogy or psychology, understood humanity more than he ever would. That night, Eduardo gathered the family. He also called Donna Celia, Valderine, and the staff, and in front of everyone she said, "I want to apologize to someone I treated unfairly. Rosaline, you're not just welcome in this house, you're part of it. And if you ever need anything at all, I'll be here." Rosaline just nodded. No fanfare, no gloating, because for her it wasn't about winning, it was about loving. And love, she knew, never needs an audience. 6 months passed. The Montero mansion wasn't the same. It still had crystal chandeliers, Italian furniture, perfect gardens. But now it also had the sound of laughter. It had kids running in the hallways. It had spontaneous hugs. It had life. Arthur was unrecognizable. He attended a special school. He made friends. He painted. He danced. He sang, especially the songs Rosaline had taught him. He was still autistic. He still had his meltdowns. But now, he also had something he'd lacked before: belonging. Julia started smiling again. Eduardo learned to look at his son without guilt. And Rosaline remained who she always was: humble, discreet, present. She didn't live in the mansion. She didn't want to. She stayed in her little house in San Gonzalo. But she visited Arthur whenever she could, and every time he saw her, he'd run to hug her, as if she were the most important thing in his world, because in a way, she was. One Sunday afternoon, while Rosaline and Arthur were playing in the garden, Julia brought a small wrapped gift. Inside, a silk scarf, hand-embroidered, with Rosaline's initials. "I know it's not much," Julia said, her eyes shining. "But I wanted to give you something that represents how much you mean to us." Rosaline took the scarf. She ran her fingers over the embroidery. She smiled. "It's beautiful, Mrs. Montero. Thank you." But the gift she treasured most in her heart wasn't that one. It was the drawing Arthur made that same day. A simple drawing, done with crayons, of a woman in an apron holding a boy's hand. And underneath, in wobbly letters, he'd written, "Rosie takes care of me." She kept that paper as if it were gold, because she knew that for her, it was worth more than any salary, more than any recognition, more than any title, because there was proof that she wasn't invisible, that her love had power, that an old song, an open heart, and a little courage could change everything. And that's how that simple woman, who only wanted respect, showed that true brilliance isn't in gold, but in the soul. And you, what did you think of this story? What lesson did it leave you with? Tell us in the comments, and be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. That way you won't miss any of our stories that move us every day.